If you're enjoying this story of survival and unexpected kindness in the Old West, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to help us share more incredible tales like this one. My name is Samuel Hayes, and I've been riding these dusty trails of the Arizona Territory for more than 20 years. I've seen enough heartbreak and cruelty to fill a dozen lifetimes. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed on that scorching July afternoon in 1882. The sun was beating down mercilessly as I guided my horse, Thunder, along the old trading route that connected Tucson to the scattered settlements further north. The heat waves were dancing off the desert floor like ghostly spirits, and even Thunder was beginning to show signs of exhaustion despite his legendary endurance. We'd been riding since dawn, and I was looking forward to reaching the next water stop when I spotted something that made my blood run cold. There, about a quarter mile off the main trail, I could make out what appeared to be a small camp, but something was wrong. No smoke from a cooking fire, no movement, no signs of life. As I drew closer, urging Thunder forward with a gentle kick, the scene became clearer and more disturbing by the minute. A broken-down wagon sat tilted at an odd angle, one of its wheels completely shattered. Scattered around it were the remnants of what had once been a family's possessions: torn clothing, broken dishes, and a child's wooden toy horse lying face down in the sand. But it was the sound that reached me first, carried on the hot desert wind, the weak crying of children. I dismounted quickly, my boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a solid thump, and approached the wagon with my hand instinctively moving to rest on the handle of my Colt .45. Years of living in this unforgiving land had taught me to be cautious. But as I rounded the wagon, caution gave way to shock, and then to a burning anger that started deep in my chest. Huddled in the meager shade provided by the wagon's broken frame was a woman and 4 children. The woman, who couldn't have been more than 30 years old, was barely conscious. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, her once clean dress now torn and stained with dust and sweat. Her dark hair hung in matted strands around. Her face and her eyes, when she managed to lift them to look at me, held a mixture of desperation and resignation that cut me to the bone. The children ranged in age, from what looked like maybe 14 years, down to a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. They were all in various stages of heat exhaustion and dehydration. The oldest, a boy with sandy hair and his mother's determined jaw, was trying his best to comfort the younger ones, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The other children, 2 girls and another boy, were clinging to their mother with what little strength they had left. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible above the constant whisper of wind across the desert. "Please help my children." I knelt down beside her, pulling my canteen from my belt. "Ma'am, I'm Samuel Hayes. I'm going to help you and your young ones. Can you tell me what happened here?" As I helped her take small sips of water, not too much. At first, as I'd learned from experience that too much water too quickly could make someone sick, she managed to tell me her story between gasps and tears. Her name was Martha Sullivan, and she'd been traveling with her husband and children from their failed homestead in New Mexico Territory to California, where her husband's brother had promised them work and a fresh start. They'd joined up with a small wagon train but 3 days into the journey, her husband had fallen ill with what appeared to be typhoid fever. "The wagon master," she said, her voice growing stronger as the water began to restore her, "he said James was contagious, said he'd infect the whole train if we stayed with them." Her eyes filled with tears as she continued, They gave us some supplies and told us to follow the trail on our own. Said we'd catch up once James got better. But James Sullivan never got better. He'd died 2 days after being abandoned by the wagon train, leaving Martha alone with 4 children, a broken wagon, and supplies that were already running dangerously low. She'd tried to continue on foot, but the youngest child couldn't walk the distances required, and carrying her while keeping the other children moving had proven impossible. "We've been here for 2 days," she said, looking at her children with a mother's fierce protectiveness. I kept thinking someone would come along, that someone would help us. As I looked at those 4 children's arms, the 14-year-old who was trying so hard to be the man of the family, Sarah, about 12, who was holding the baby, Michael, maybe 8 years old, who kept asking for his papa, and little Emma, the 3-year-old who didn't fully understand why they were in this terrible place. I felt something shift inside me. I'd always been a loner. After losing my own family to cholera back in Kansas 15 years earlier, I'd sworn off attachments. It was easier to ride alone, to not care too much, to keep moving. But looking at this family, abandoned and left to die in the desert, I knew I couldn't just ride away. "Mrs. Sullivan," I said, standing up and surveying the situation, "I'm going to get you and your children out of here. But we need to move smart and move careful." The relief in her eyes was almost overwhelming. "Mr. Hayes, we don't have any money to pay you. We lost everything when—" "Ma'am," I interrupted gently, "there are some things in this world that don't require payment. Getting children to safety is one of them." I spent the next hour assessing our situation and making plans. Thunder was strong, but he couldn't carry 6 people. The nearest settlement was Copper Creek, about 30 miles northeast. But that would mean leaving the main trail and heading into country I knew could be dangerous Apache territory. Though the tribes in this area had been mostly peaceful for the past few years, I decided our best bet was to make for a way station I knew about, run by an old friend named Pete Kowalski. It was only about 15 miles away, following a route that would keep us near a seasonal creek bed where we might find water. It would mean traveling through the night to avoid the worst of the heat. But with the children in their current condition, I didn't think we had much choice. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I helped Martha and the children prepare for the journey ahead. I'd given them water and some of the jerky and hardtack I carried in my saddlebags, and already they were looking stronger. Children are resilient, I'd learned over the years, often more so than adults. "Mr. Hayes," Thomas said, approaching me as I checked Thunder's tack, "I want to thank you for helping us. I know you didn't have to stop." I looked at this boy who was trying so hard to be a man, and I saw something of myself at that age. Determination, the sense of responsibility, the fear he was trying so hard to hide. "Thomas," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "when you see people in trouble, you help them. That's what decent folks do. Your father would be proud of how you've been taking care of your family." As darkness began to fall over the desert, we prepared to leave that place of abandonment and despair behind. But I knew that the real challenges were still ahead of us. The desert at night is a different world entirely from the blazing furnace it becomes during the day. As we began our journey toward Pete's way station, the temperature dropped enough to make travel bearable, though I knew we'd need to reach shelter before the sun rose again. I'd fashioned a makeshift travois from some of the salvageable parts of the Sullivan's wagon, using rope from my pack and a blanket Martha had managed to save. Little Emma rode on this contraption, along with what few supplies we could carry. Thunder, bless his heart, didn't complain about the extra load, though I could tell he was working harder than usual. Martha walked beside the travois, one hand always on Emma to keep her secure. Sarah and Michael stayed close to their mother, while Thomas insisted on walking point with me, determined to prove he could handle whatever dangers we might face. "Tell me about where we're going," Martha said as we made our way across the moonlit desert, following what remained of an old Apache trail I'd learned about years earlier. Pete Kowalski runs a trading post and way station about 15 miles. From here, I explained, keeping my voice low in the way that desert travel demands. He's a good man, helped me out of more than one tight spot over the years. His place sits right on a natural spring, and he's always got supplies for travelers. Will he, will he help us? She asked, and I could hear the worry in her voice. Too many people had already turned their backs on this family. Pete's got a good heart, I assured her, and he's got a soft spot for children. Lost his own family back in Ohio before he came west. He'll help us. We walked. I found myself studying this family that had been thrust into my care. Martha Sullivan was stronger than she looked, despite everything she'd been through, losing her husband, being abandoned by people who should have helped her, facing the very real possibility of death in the desert. She kept moving forward, kept encouraging her children, kept finding reasons to hope. Thomas was maturing before my eyes. Every few minutes, he'd drop back to check on his siblings, then return to my side to scan the horizon for potential threats. He was learning to read the desert the way his father probably never had the chance to teach him. Sarah, at 12, had taken on the role of little mother to her younger siblings. She made sure Michael had water when he needed it, sang softly to Emma when the little girl got frightened, and somehow managed to keep everyone's spirits up even when I could see the exhaustion in her own eyes. Michael, the 8-year-old, asked the most questions. He wanted to know about the plants we passed, the sounds we heard, why the stars looked different here than they had back home. His curiosity reminded me of my own son, who would have been about his age if he'd lived. And little Emma, despite being only 3, seemed to understand that this was an adventure, not a tragedy. She pointed out pretty rocks and funny shaped clouds and somehow managed to find wonder in our desperate situation. We'd been walking for about 3 hours when I heard something that made me raise my hand for everyone to stop. In the distance, barely audible over the sound of our movement, I could hear horses. "Everyone down," I whispered, and we all crouched behind a large boulder that jutted up from the desert floor. I pulled out my spyglass and scanned the moonlit, the landscape ahead of us. 3 riders, moving slowly along the same trail we'd been following. They were still a good distance away, but something about the way they moved suggested they weren't just travelers. They were searching for something, or someone. "What is it?" Martha whispered. "Could be nothing," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Could be travelers like us. But we're going to wait here until they pass. We huddled behind that boulder for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes. The riders passed by our position, heading in the direction we'd come from. As they got closer, I could make out more details through my spyglass. 3 men, well armed, riding good horses. They had the look of men who were comfortable with violence. After they'd passed and their horsebeats had faded into the distance, we resumed our journey. But now I was more alert, more careful about the route we took. I had a bad feeling about those riders, and in my experience, bad feelings in the desert usually meant trouble. "Mr. Hayes," Thomas said as we crested a small rise, "were those men?" looking for us. The boy was perceptive. I decided he deserved an honest answer. I don't know for certain, I said, but it's possible. Some folks out here make their living by taking advantage of travelers in difficult situations. I didn't want to say more in front of the younger children, but Martha understood. Her face paled, and she pulled the children closer to her. What would they want with us? She asked. We don't have anything of value. Ma'am, I said carefully, out here, people are sometimes considered valuable. Especially ... I glanced at Sarah and Emma, and Martha understood immediately, her jaw set in a hard line. Over my dead body, she said quietly, but with a steel in her voice that told me this woman would fight like a wildcat to protect her children. It won't come to that, I promised her. We're going to get to Pete's place, and we're going to figure out what to do next. The rest of the night passed without incident, though I remained on high alert. As dawn began to break over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in soft pink and gold, I spotted the familiar landmark that told me we were close to Pete's way station, a distinctive rock formation that looked like a giant's thumb pointing toward the sky. There, I said, pointing toward a stand of cottonwood trees in the distance. That's where we're headed. The children perked up at the sight of the trees, which meant water and shade and rest. Even thunder seemed to sense that our destination was near, picking up his pace slightly despite the long night's journey. But as we approached the trading post, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. No smoke from the chimney, no horses in the corral, no signs of life at all. Pete's place looked abandoned as we drew closer to Pete's trading post. My worst fears seemed to be confirmed. The place looked deserted, the corrals empty, the windows dark. My heart sank as I realized we might have traveled all night only to find another dead end. But then I spotted something that gave me hope. Fresh horse tracks leading away from the post, heading north. They were recent, probably made within the last day or two. That meant Pete might just be out on business, not gone permanently. Wait here, I told Martha and the children as we approached the main building. Let me check things out first. I approached the trading post with my hand on my gun, though I was reasonably certain it was empty. The front door was locked. But Pete and I had an understanding from years back. There was a key hidden under a loose board on the back porch for emergencies. The interior of the post was dusty but undisturbed. Pete's goods were still on the shelves, his personal belongings still in place. On the table, I found a note written in Pete's distinctive scrawl. Gone to Prescott for supplies. Back in a week, PK. The date on the note was 5 days old, which meant Pete should be back any day now. In the meantime, we had shelter, water from the spring, and access to supplies. I returned to the family with the good news. Pete's out. On business, but he left everything secure. We can wait here for him, and I know he won't mind us using his supplies. The relief on Martha's face was obvious. You mean we can rest? Really rest? Yes, ma'am. There's a good spring here, plenty of food, and real beds for the children. The next few hours were spent getting everyone settled and fed. I showed Martha where Pete kept his medical supplies, and she was able to tend to the children's cuts and bruises from their ordeal. The little ones seemed to come back to life once they'd had a proper meal and a chance to clean up. I was just starting to relax when I heard the sound of approaching horses. Through the window, I could see dust, clouds in the distance, moving fast in our direction. Martha, I called quietly, get the children into the back room and keep them quiet. I positioned myself at the front window with my rifle, watching as 3 riders approached the trading post. My heart sank as I recognized them. They were the same 3 men we'd seen during our night journey. They rode up boldly, making no attempt at stealth. The leader, a tall man with a graying beard and cold eyes, dismounted and approached the front door. "Hello, the house," he called out. "We're looking for some folks who might have passed this way. A woman and some children." I remained silent, hoping they'd assume the place was empty and move on. But the man was persistent. "We know you're in there, mister. Saw the smoke from your fire. We're not looking for trouble, just want to talk." I knew better than to believe that, but I also knew we were in a defensive position. The trading post was built solid, with thick walls and narrow windows that provided good cover. "What do you want with the woman and children?" I called back. "Now that's between us and them." The man replied, "Why don't you come out here and we'll discuss it like civilized men?" "I think we can discuss it just fine from here," I said, "and I think you'd best move along." There was a moment of silence. Then I heard the man talking quietly to his companions. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell they were planning something. "Listen, friend," the man called out again. "We don't want any trouble with you, but we're not leaving without those folks. See, the woman's got debts to pay, and her children. Well, let's just say there are people who'd pay good money for. Healthy children." My blood ran cold. These weren't just opportunistic bandits, they were slave traders, the lowest form of human scum that existed on the frontier. Over my dead body, I called back, and I meant every word of it. "That can be arranged," the man replied, and I heard the unmistakable sound of rifles being cocked. What followed was a tense standoff that lasted most of the afternoon. The 3 men took positions around the trading post, but they couldn't get close enough to force entry without exposing themselves to my rifle. I had the advantage of good cover and a clear field of fire, but I was also outnumbered and had a family to protect. As the sun began to set, I realized the men were getting impatient. They'd probably expected this to be easy. Intimidate a lone man into handing over a helpless woman and her children. But they'd underestimated both my resolve and my defensive position. "Thomas," I called quietly to the back room, "I need you to do something for me." The boy appeared immediately, his face pale but determined. "What do you need, Mr. Hayes?" "There's a bell rope that leads to the roof," I said, pointing to a corner of the room. "Pete uses it to signal travelers. I need you to ring that bell as loud and as long as you can." "Why?" he asked. "Because Pete's got friends in these parts, and that bell means trouble. If anyone's within hearing distance, they'll come running." Thomas nodded and headed for the bell rope without another word. Within moments, the clear, urgent sound of the bell was echoing across the desert landscape. The effect on our attackers was immediate. I heard angry shouts from outside, and one of them called out, "Stop that damned noise." "Can't do that," I replied. "Seems like my finger's stuck on the trigger, and that boy's arm is stuck on the bell rope." The bell continued to ring, and I could tell the men outside were getting nervous. They'd probably hoped to conduct their business quietly, without attracting attention from other travelers or lawmen. As darkness fell, I began to worry that help might not come in time. The men outside were clearly getting ready to make that move, probably planning to rush the building under cover of darkness. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Lots of them, coming fast from the direction of the main trail. "Looks like you've got company," I called out to the men outside. What happened next was swift and decisive. A group of 6 riders approached the trading post at full gallop. Even in the darkness, I could see they were well armed and riding hard. The leader called out in a voice I recognized immediately. "This is Marshal Tom Bradley. You men are surrounded. Drop your weapons and surrender." The 3 would-be kidnappers apparently decided they didn't like those odds. I heard the rapid sound of horses being mounted, followed by the thunder of hooves heading away from the trading post at top speed. Marshal Bradley and his men gave chase, but returned within an hour. "Sam Hayes," the marshal called out as he approached. "The trading post. You old son of a gun, what kind of trouble have you gotten yourself into this time?" Tom Bradley was an old friend from my earlier days in the territory, back when I'd worn a badge myself. He'd been tracking the 3 men for weeks, following reports of families being attacked and children disappearing along the frontier trails. "We've been trying to catch up with those bastards for over a month," Tom explained as we sat around Pete's table, sharing coffee and the story of our encounters. "They've been targeting vulnerable families, selling children too. Well, to people who shouldn't have children." Martha shuddered at the implications, pulling little Emma closer to her side. "What happens now?" she asked. "We still don't have anywhere to go. We lost everything when James died." Tom looked thoughtful. "Well, ma'am, I might have a solution for that. There's a family in Prescott, the Andersons, who've been looking for someone to help them run their general store. Lost their oldest son to consumption last year, and they're getting too old to handle everything themselves. They specifically said they'd welcome a family, someone who could help with the business and eventually take it over. But we don't have any money," Martha protested. "We can't pay for passage to Prescott. Territory's got a fund for families who've been victims of crimes," Tom said. "What happened to you folks qualifies. We can provide transportation and enough to get you started." I watched the hope bloom in Martha's eyes and felt something stir in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. These people had become important to me, and the thought of them finding a real home filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't expected. "What about you, Mr. Hayes?" Sarah asked. "Will you come with us?" I looked at this young girl who'd been through so much, who'd somehow maintained her sweetness and hope despite everything, and I felt my carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "Well," I said slowly, "I suppose I could ride along. Make sure you folks get settled safely, and then?" Martha asked, and there was something in her voice that made me look at her more carefully. "Then... I paused, realizing that for the first time in 15 years, I was actually considering putting down roots somewhere. "Then we'll see what happens." Pete returned the next morning, full of apologies for being away during our crisis, and full of praise for how we'd handled the situation. He insisted on providing us with a proper wagon and supplies for the journey to Prescott, refusing any payment. "Sam Hayes," he said as we prepared to leave, "you've always been welcome here, but bringing this family through safely... that's something special. You've got a standing invitation to come back anytime, and that goes for all of you." The journey to Prescott took 3 days, and it was unlike any travel I'd ever experienced. Instead of the solitary contemplation I was used to, the trail was filled with conversation, laughter, and the constant awareness that I was part of something larger than myself. Thomas peppered me with questions about tracking, shooting, and surviving in the wilderness. I found myself teaching him skills I'd never thought I'd pass on to anyone. Sarah asked about the places I'd been, the people I'd met, and somehow got me talking about my past in ways I'd never done before. Michael wanted to know about everything: the plants, the animals, the rocks, the weather. His curiosity was infectious, and I found myself seeing the desert through his eyes, noticing beauty I'd forgotten was there. Little Emma just wanted to sit next to me whenever we stopped to rest, chattering about everything and nothing in the way that only small children can. She'd lost her father, been abandoned in the desert, and faced dangers that would have broken many adults. But she still believed the world was fundamentally good, and Martha was a revelation. As she recovered from the trauma of the past weeks, her strength and intelligence became more apparent. She had ideas about business, about community, about building something lasting. She'd been a teacher before marrying James, and she talked about maybe starting a school in Prescott for the children of families who were trying to build new lives. On our last night on the trail, as we sat around the campfire with the children, asleep nearby, Martha and I talked about the future. Samuel, she said she'd stopped calling me Mr. Hayes somewhere along the way. I want to thank you for saving us. But more than that, I want to thank you for giving us hope. You folks gave me something too, I said, staring into the fire. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a family. You don't have to forget again, she said quietly. The next morning, we reached Prescott, a growing town nestled in the mountains of central Arizona territory. The Andersons turned out to be exactly what Tom Bradley had promised: good people looking for help and willing to provide a real opportunity. William Anderson was a tall, dignified man in his 60s who'd built his general store from nothing over the past 20 years. His wife, Helen, was a motherly woman who took one look at the Sullivan children and immediately began planning ways to make them feel at home. We've got living quarters above the store, William explained as he showed us around. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable, and there's a good school here in town for the children. What about payment? Martha asked. We don't have anything to offer except our willingness to work. Ma'am, Helen Anderson said with a smile, we've been praying for someone like you, someone who understands what it means to build a life from scratch, someone who'll treat this business like their own, because someday it will be their own. As I watched the Sullivan family begin to settle into their new life, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. But I also felt something else: a reluctance to leave, to return to my solitary existence on the trail. That evening, Martha found me sitting on the porch of the hotel where I'd taken a room, looking out at the lights of the town. You're planning to leave, aren't you? She said, sitting down beside me. It's what I do, I said. I'm not much good at staying in one place. Samuel Hayes, she said, and there was steel in her voice again. You're one of the best men I've ever known. You're patient with children, you're brave when it matters, and you're kind in ways that most people never even think about. Don't you think it's time you stopped running from happiness? I looked at this remarkable woman who'd survived abandonment, faced down slave traders, and was now ready to build a new life in a strange town, and I realized she was right. Ma'am, I said, are you asking me to stay? I'm asking you to consider it, she said. The Andersons could use help with security and transportation. The town could use a good man who knows the territory, and we could use someone who's already proven he'll stand by us when things get difficult. I thought about it for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night, thinking about all the empty trails I'd ridden over the years. Martha, I said finally, I think I'd like that very much. 6 months later, I was officially appointed as Prescott's deputy marshal, responsible for protecting the trade routes and helping travelers in distress. Martha and I were married in the spring, with Thomas proudly giving his mother away, and little Emma insisting on throwing flower petals everywhere. The general store prospered under Martha's management, and the Andersons eventually deeded it to us, saying we'd become the family they'd always wanted. Thomas learned the business and showed a real aptitude for dealing with people. Sarah did indeed start a school, first for the younger children in town, then expanding to serve families throughout the territory. Michael became the town's unofficial expert on desert plants and animals, eventually going on to study at the Territorial University. And Emma grew up believing that the world was a place where strangers helped each other, where families could be found in the most unlikely circumstances, and where love could bloom even in the harshest conditions. As for me, I learned that some of the best journeys end not with reaching a destination, but with finding a home you never knew you were looking for. Every now and then, when I'm out on patrol or helping a family in distress, I think back to that day when I first spotted a broken wagon in the desert. I think about how close I came to just riding past, how easy it would have been to mind my own business and keep moving. But I didn't, and because I didn't, 5 lives were saved, and 1 life, mine, was completely transformed. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply stop when you see someone who needs help. Sometimes being a hero is just about being human. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of storytellers, and give this video a thumbs up to help others discover these powerful tales of courage and compassion from America's frontier days.